loosen it up, pat it, so I don't have to cut this. Isn't that gorgeous? That's going to be so pretty this fall. I am sitting outside enjoying what is turning into a beautiful fall morning. It is absolutely gorgeous. The smell in the air, which of course is crisp, we're dealing with on average 70s in terms of temperatures. So I think we're officially entering that cool, crisp fall morning phase of the season. The smell is amazing. It's just like burning wood, like a campfire smell, mixed with a little bit of pine, which is where I'm sitting right now, which is where I love to come to you guys from, in my backyard, where I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 very mature pine trees. These pine trees have really changed the nature of my backyard garden beds. I mean, we're talking about a partial sun, partial shade environment. So I've really put plantings in the ground in my backyard with that in mind, of how much light exposure they're going to get and what the watering needs are. Of course, that would be less if they're in shaded spots. And I've got some of my coffee that I put a little bit of my pumpkin spice into. I was at the grocery store, and the Green Mountain pumpkin spice Keurig cups, which I think there's like, I don't know, 12 of them, if that. I mean, $9. That's expensive. I mean, we've been steadily paying more and more and more for coffee, and it's just gotten to the point where I kind of refuse to pay that much for a seasonal coffee blend. So I just opted to put some pumpkin spice in there, something that you would, pour the powder into like a pumpkin pie mix to make a pumpkin pie. It goes really well in the coffee. Going into the fall and the cooler temperatures, I can now plant stuff, which is what I've been showing you guys. I did buy some plants at a couple of recent native fall plant sales. I got some bee balm. I got some red columbine. I got some black-eyed Susan, some coneflower, all those great native species. And then I also got a juniper that is just lovely out in my front garden bed as well, which will be obviously a nice and evergreen for us in the winter time. So that'll add just that pop of color when everything is died back and has gotten dreary. So yeah, I'm really focused right now as we enter into the latter part of October, planting some of those in the ground that I feel need to establish roots, right before winter, making sure I'm not neglecting watering needs before the winter for my somewhat established plants. And when I say established, I mean I planted them in the ground in June or May, and some even July. So some of those that have been planted out, like my hydrangeas in my side bed, my south-facing side bed that receives full sun, those I've really had to just drown in water all summer, but they have survived. They've not put on a bunch of new growth. Those are generally slower growers in general. So I'm looking forward to next spring and the year after in 2026 to really see those come into their own. So it's been a journey. It's been a great 6-month-long journey, and I don't want to screw it up now that we're in the home stretch, now that we're in the winter time, the true dormancy phase for so many of these perennials. I want to keep them alive. So I'm going to do my darndest to do my research and figure out whether I want to keep some of them in the ground. I mean, most of them obviously will stay in the ground, but some can be dug up that need to go in pots and winterized in my garage for the dormancy period. Some of those examples being Mediterranean thriving type plants such as Dusty Miller, which is typically in our grow zone considered an annual, but I want to see if I can grow it as a perennial. So that means I'm going to dig those 3 plants up, put them in pots. I'm not going to overwater them in the winter time because they don't really need to put on new growth. They just need to stay in their pots with moist soil in a temperate garage type environment. So I'm going to do that. I don't think I'm going to go too crazy with digging up my other plants. Some of those, like the Gara, which are really drought tolerant, they thrive in the heat. So I'm kind of worried about the Gara, but it's on a slope. So from what I've researched and read about Gaura, is that with those hard frosts and freezes and snow and ice, the concern is getting the root ball too wet and saturated by sitting in that. So like melted snow and ice. So I think that hopefully, because of the layout of the topography of where it's located on a slant, I can avoid that. So I am going to keep my Gaura in its garden bed over winter. I am going to trim it down, not yet, because it is still flowering, in fact, so that's good. Still beautiful, those pink blooms, absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, I mean, it's really minimized the amount of growth and blooms, but when it's fully stopped, I would imagine the latter part of November, that's when I'll cut it down. As far as my rose bushes, I'm probably going to give those one more prune, I believe. I'm going to look into that, make sure I'm not sacrificing next spring's blooms, because a lot of times those buds, you don't want to clip those off and prune those because the rose does go into a period of dormancy over the winter. I don't think we're dormant yet because I still have blooms. So I will research that a little bit more before I do that. In terms of other plants that I'm going to bring inside that are already in pots, I have a fern, an asparagus fern. Going to bring that in when we get into a hard freeze. That typically happens around Halloween, the end of October, if I remember correctly. I need to check out my Farmer's Almanac to see when it's predicted for 2024 for this year. I have a maidenhair fern that I'm going to bring inside that's been outside all summer. I love maidenhair ferns so much. I had two and I killed one, unfortunately. So I think it had some kind of root rot. It was really stinky and smelly there at the end, and it died. But I do have my other maidenhair fern I'm hoping to, nurture and keep. Let's see, what else? I've got some basil. I'm going to put all my basil into one big pot and bring that inside to overwinter that. So that's, another one that thrives in the Mediterranean type climate, so needs to come indoors. My creeping Jenny, I'm not sure what to do with that. I don't know if I need to bring that in or not. The fewer plants I can bring inside, the better, because I've never been one to love houseplants particularly. I don't know if I'm good or not at keeping those alive. So, yeah. Now there's a couple I'm going to plant out today that need to get in the ground, I believe. Some bee balm. I think I'm going to plant that next to my existing bee balm. These are different varieties of bee balm, so I'm hoping that they'll spread next year by seed or rhizomes. However they spread, I'm hoping that they'll do that. I'm giving them plenty of room. I'm also going to plant some obedience. Now with obedience, that one loves sun. And I have a huge plot of garden bed on my south side, full sun garden bed next to the hydrangeas that I had to put in there as a replacement for some rose bushes that had died. So I'm going to plant my obedience there, and it spreads prolifically. I mean, it is a super producer. So, and it can kind of take over. So I'm going to give it plenty of room. It's beautiful purple blooms. I absolutely love this plant. It is a native. And so I believe I have some loose strife as well. And I'm going to plant that kind of in the same garden bed. It's another one that spreads in a major way. So anything that really thrives in that kind of super sun, full sun location, I think is going to be really good there, even though my plant starters are really small. Now, I did want to speak to a failure I had recently, which really has broken my heart. I got a $2 starter at the plant sale of Brunnera, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous full shade plant that looks like kind of like a hosta, but just a really unique foliage. And unfortunately, it died. It wasn't looking good when I bought it, and I could tell that the growers I bought it from at their booth, they were kind of like, well, I'd go with this one, but you could just tell that there was more to that. They were probably saying, I don't know if you're going to have success with this, but obviously they, weren't going to say that, but I don't hold it against them. I don't know why this Brunnera has not thrived. I've kept the soil very moist. I've kept it in a shady spot, dappled shade. Maybe it needed to be more full shade. I have the oak leaf hydrangea, the rhododendron in the backyard, And so I'm going to just give those a nice watering before we get really cold. So here in the next couple days, I'm going to water those, and then maybe a week from now. And I think by that point, around October 20th, 25th, we should be getting pretty cold. If memory serves me well, October 31st is always freezing. Sometimes we've even had some sleet and a little bit of snow flurries on Halloween night. So I hope that doesn't happen this year, because I'd really like it to be a little bit warmer. But that gives me kind of a good gauge for knowing when I can stop watering, because you don't want to send your plants into that dormancy period with too much water. You don't want to risk root rot, and you just want to make sure that, you know, they're hydrated going into the season, but not overly so. You really do have to think about the long term, your long game in some of these scenarios, depending on the plant. Oh, and the catmint. I did put one of my Nepeta catmints next to my other catmint that is in my garden bed. All the catmint that I've grown, those plants, I have grown from cuttings that I've put in rooting hormone and propagated, and they have done so well. And I just cannot wait. It's a nice little shrub that doesn't get very tall. It just adds to greenery on your garden beds. And I absolutely cannot wait to see how this plant performs over the next, year. I mean, I think it's going to be super great. I think that is one of those plants, if you can pick one up from the garden store, just one. And if you can figure out how to propagate it, it's not complicated, and just have the patience and the TLC with that, you will be blown away at the bang for your buck that you can get with just that one plant. Hydrangeas. I've got to decide what to do with those, because I've got two right now that have grown beautifully from propagation. Should I put one in the ground and keep one in the pot, just like I'm doing with the Nepeta, to experiment to see what the wintering is like for those? I'm not sure. I feel like the hydrangea, especially, I need to let it mature a little bit and get into a larger plant before I put it into the ground. I've never done it. So if you have any input on that experience, please feel free to comment below, because I would love to get feedback. But I may plant one out just for fun today and see what happens, because that's another one that's pretty easy to propagate. And I already have some existing very mature hydrangea plants as well. I hope that you're learning something along with me. I'm on a journey to just try to make my front and backyards and side yards as wondrous as I can. And I just think now more than ever, when the housing market is the way it is, beautifying your existing landscape is a great way to, deal with all the economic pressures of this life. And making your space beautiful is so good for mental wellness, I think. And it gives you something to look forward to every day. It keeps your mind occupied, keeps you busy physically out in the yard, and it gets you close to nature. And you'll start observing things that, you never even imagined, like the birds that you start to notice flock to your yard, or the wildlife. Here are some perennial mums. I don't see a container, so obviously they put these in the ground, and they're looking absolutely beautiful. You can see they're in a dappled shade area, so they do get some sun, which is going to help you with blooms, the amount of blooms. And check out this ground cover. Wow, this is just a random yard in my neighborhood. I'm on a run, and this just stopped me in my tracks, because I thought I need to show everybody just how beautiful perennial mums in our garden zone 6B can look. Amazing. My loose strife, which has kind of just stayed in this growth stage. It hasn't really taken off at all over the summer, but it's done okay. These are from rooted cuttings, and this is the obedience. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this in the ground so they can establish roots before winter. I feel like this would be the perfect spot to hide this utility stuff, because I've got an entire garden bed here where this stuff can just multiply if need be. And this stuff gets really tall. So both have purple blooms on them. Both are native. This one, loose strife, can kind of get a bad rap because certain types can be considered invasive. But this is not the type, I don't believe. So this is a native perennial, as well as the Obedience. Has huge, beautiful blooms. It does sometimes require some staking though, because it does get so tall. This glass jar does not have any drainage holes, so it's pretty important for me to get this out and into the ground, I think, right now. This one is proving to be very tricky to get out here of this glass jar, because I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to ruin it. But you see all those roots coming out of the top? Popped out. Look at all those roots, baby. And then put some stuff back on there. And there's my loose strife. Doesn't look like much now, but again, the hope is that it will be in the future, and it'll fill in this space nicely along with the Obedience. This is that bee balm I was telling you about. It's really pretty. I'm just gonna go ahead and plant this right next to the existing bee balm that I put in a few weeks ago. I'm just gonna put that right next to it, even though it's slightly different. You don't wanna be too rough there at the base of the plant, because you don't wanna rip out the roots.